Hi there everyone, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawalker, your host. Today we're going to be covering the first Primus record, 1990's Frizzle Fry. I ate too many fucking Jack in the Box fries. This monumental record kickstarted one of the strangest bands in modern rock history. The track listing for this record is as follows. We have side 1 with To Defy the Laws of Tradition, track 2 is Groundhog's Day, track 3 is Too Many Puppies, track 4 is Mr. Know-It-All, track 5 is Frizzle Fry, and side 2 on this thing is a bit bottom heavy. We've got about another 8 tracks on side 2 alone, with track 6 being John the Fisherman, track 7 being You Can't Kill Michael Malloy, track 8 is The Toys Go Winding Down, track 9 is Pudding Time, track 10 is Sathington Willoughby, track 11 is Spaghetti Western, and track 12 is Herald of the Rocks, and the final track, track 13 on the record, is To Defy. We're going to give side 1 a listen here, and we'll come back to you on the flip side. Alrighty, we are back with side 1 of the record. First track off of the album is To Defy the Laws of Tradition, a fun fake-out intro of like Rush's YYZ plays that just kicks off the track. It's a fun little fake-out that like ends with a record scratching to a halt and then the actual track beginning. Kind of a fun way to start the record off. If you know anything about Primus, you will absolutely know that pretty much any album with Les Claypool on it is incredibly bass-heavy. This track grooves into a weird category of like alternative metal in subsegments, as well as like alternative rock and kind of grungy segments too. This being 1990, it's kind of before the big wave of grunge bands, but you can definitely tell that this is like a sound for a new decade here. Primus at this point is very fresh. The musical direction that this album and this track would take are very telling of where this kind of music would go over the next decade or so. Much of this ends up being, in a lot of ways, some proto-nu metal type stuff on here. This song is very catchy. The guitar work is incredibly creative, playing mostly off of the drums rather than taking the spotlight for most of the track, which is left mostly to the bass here. Track number 2 is Groundhog's Day. This track kind of lazily saunters in on this album. With its intro, it's just a very, very laid-back song. Even when like the volume of the track bumps up a notch, it doesn't last for very long until like damn near towards the end of the song, which is how the track ends off. But it's for the most part, this track is mostly the kind of lazy that is like accompanied by a Hawaiian shirt and like sweatpants. There's some real slow, sauntering moods here. Like this is a greasy, grimy track. Not to say the songwriting is lazy, it's actually very brilliant, but Primus is catching this like 2 p.m. waking up, you know, just way after the point where you should have kind of feeling to a T with the majority of this track. Just the sound on this thing is incredibly just like middle of the day, not doing a goddamn thing. I haven't even really put on underwear yet, but I'm wearing these sweats anyway kind of feeling. The ending of this track kicks up the heaviest a bit of a notch too, which is very nice, and it still kind of falls in line with the rest of the track as well, as it kind of just builds up to this point. But it's a real weird, interesting track on this thing. Track 3 is Too Many Puppies. A very ominous ringing of cymbals and bass work lead into one of the heaviest songs that I would say is in the Primus catalog. An intensely framed critique of war, using the visage of dead puppies as a way to visualize the needless deaths of soldiers over futile wars. The song grooves over this incredible drum work. This, in my opinion, is an integral part of the blueprint that would be nu metal throughout the 90s. Like I was saying, this album has nu metal stuff like all over it, or proto-nu metal influences all over it. But this song in particular, I think, really lends itself to the way that music would evolve, or at least heavier rock and metal would evolve through the later part of the 90s. This album and this song are just like ripe with just the stuff that would become like Korn and fucking like Limp Bizkit. Not to say that's bad or anything. I mean, this album's amazing. You know, if it's a little bit responsible for nu metal, that's okay. And honestly, man, Limp Bizkit isn't that bad. I'll say it. Limp Bizkit is not a terrible band. You know, Fred Durst is kind of a weirdo, but like honestly, the rest of his band are like pretty talented players, oddly enough. Track 4 is Mr. Know-It-All. Les Claypool's nasally vocals kick off this track into another intensely groovy song. Once again, very bass-focused album. The track is mostly formatted between instrumentals and pauses for lyrics, which are spit out pretty much by Les as the track goes along. The climax of this track builds to like an even louder, more ferocious version of the riffs that we've heard previously in the song. And the grooves that this thing are just building throughout the entire track are just really let off towards the end here. For the most part, there's not too much variation in the riffs and licks that are played through this thing, or even through much of the drumming, but they kind of get just a little more intricate as the song goes on. It's a really nice, like, how can we just build off of like a basic idea kind of song. Great track. Track 5 is Frizzle Fry. Another ominous, almost dreamlike intro greets us for this song that would almost fall in line with some of the tracks off of like the early Tool records with like Anima or like Undertow. This thing has just got some like really interesting guitar tones on it that are like almost like 100% like Adam Jones, like 1979 Les Paul type stuff in here. Obviously this album is like predates Tool a bit, so you could really argue that Tool is going for more of a Primus sound almost, but the comparisons I still think are there. Just the sound of this track is very progressive even for this album. This is definitely like a prog metal song in the infancy of like an alternative prog metal kind of style. The instrumentals for this track are really captivating. Les is really showcasing his vocals on this thing with a lot of varied vocal work. The drums are tight as hell. The song has this really great refrain in the middle of the track that leads into one of like the most watertight drum sections that I have ever heard. This is a Rhythm Section fan's wet dream. The guitar and bass solos on this thing are tight as well. The guitar solo, I mean, on this track, that going over that incredibly tight drum segment on this thing, it is just, it's like frantic, it's sloppy, but like intentionally done. It is really nice, and the song kind of just leaves off from that heavy point with like another sort of fade back down in intensity and tone, back to sort of what we were getting at the beginning of the track with sort of like the ominous notes and stuff. But overall, this track I think is just really varied for where it is on the album. It's a great track, it's a great title track. I think that this is one of the best tracks on this album, and that is the end of side 1 as well. So we have the relatively lighter half of the album covered off. We have about 8 tracks coming up on side 2, so we'll see how those go. We're going to give that one a spin, and we will see you on the flip side. Alrighty, we are back with side 2 of the record. Track number 6 on this thing is John the Fisherman. A great drum groove kicks off this track. One of the most recognizable songs in the Primus catalog. John the Fisherman is absolutely a huge radio hit, was a huge radio hit. You'll still hear it on the freaking radio in some places. The themes of fishing would remain pretty consistent in Les Claypool's writing for many years. I mean, from his solo stuff to later Primus work, there's tons and tons of fishing stuff in a lot of his stuff for whatever reason. As far as Primus tracks go, this song is pretty straightforward, with more bizarre guitar work and really fantastic drumming on this thing as well, all of which lends itself to the bass for this song. This is definitely like a peak moment for Primus. This track is very definitive for where they would go with the rest of their discography. Track 7 is You Can't Kill Michael Malloy, a circusy intro track for the next song on the album, which is track 8, The Toys Go Winding Down. A fun staccato bass line carries this song with a high gain guitar solo that soars off over the top of this track as well. This is another very signature moment of Primus weirdness for songwriting. To call this song strange would be kind of an understatement. Instrumentals are very tight. Lyrically, this song is a bit hellish, but overall, great track. Track 9 is Pudding Time. Lyrically, in the last track, they mentioned some parts of the song with Pudding Time. This song is immediately very groove heavy and solo heavy, and almost feels like a second part to that track. This is definitely a showcase for the guitar here. The lyrics are almost like rapped or like scatted over the verses. It's kind of weird, but it works really well with just like Les Claypool's like fast, like low, like note delivery on this thing. This is another weird, fun track, so pretty par for the course for Primus. Like I said, this kind of fits in with the last track, almost like a part 1 and part 2 kind of thing. Track 10 on the record is Sathington Willoughby. This is another lead into another track. This one is kind of like a weird, like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like kind of an almost like folksy kind of interlude track. It's definitely a bit weird. It's not a very long track at all, but I think it's a bit notable and just like how like out of place it is. Not, I mean, for a Primus album, this is not like an out of place track. This is something that you would come to expect, but like it is definitely one of the more unique moments on the album where you're just like, what the fuck is going on? But it leads into the 11th track on the record, Spaghetti Western. A really great drum fill with some upright bass rumblings kind of lead off this track. The lyrics to this song are kind of delivered in like a train of thought manner that makes this into like a really abstract song thematically. The guitars absolutely go off on this track. There's a lot of really guitar-heavy parts on this song, with some really roaring gain and reverb on these things. The bass and drums just continually get heavier as the track goes on, with no signs of letting up whatsoever. This is probably another one of my favorite tracks on the record, with it kind of just being pieced together thematically and just with these building and building guitar and drum and bass tempos. And just like I said, this guitar gets a really nice showcase on this thing. It's a really great track. The chorus on this track kind of just like repeats itself loudly through most of the track here and there, but just like the way they vary tempo and they go from one segment to another is just very well done. It's buttery smooth on this thing. Track 12 on this thing is Herald of the Rocks. This song narratively is way more straightforward than the last track. This track almost sometimes falls into like some funk influences in the verses. This track is just loaded with swagger that flows from one part to the next. It is just full to the brim of just like big waving dick kind of shit on this thing. The guitar work really shines in this song as well, with loads and loads of ascending and descending parts all over slow bass grooves towards the second half of the song that really pull this song to like a very nice creative peak on this record as well. Herald of the Rocks, I think, is a really, really great track to leave off this album on. Like the end of the song just kind of like leads to this nice little like da-na-na-na-ba, you know, it's the end, guys, you know, confetti cannons. It's really fun. And the last track on the album is kind of a fade out track, really making Herald of the Rocks the definitive final track on the album. But track 13 is very much just a quick reprise of the first track on the album that quickly fades out to end the record. It's maybe 20 or 30 seconds. But overall, this record is just such like a defining moment for the genre of like progressive metal or alternative metal or prog metal. All these guys, man, like on this album are just so tight. They are pushing the envelope so hard. There is not much, like in 1990, I mean, a lot of like the popular music at the time, it's just like, this album just came way out of left field from where, you know, from when it was released. I mean, 1990, you're a year before the Black Album, you have Rust in Peace out, and you have like these monumental like thrash metal and heavy metal records coming out. You got like Painkiller coming out by Judas Priest, and here comes Primus out of nowhere with just this strange album. I think that Primus is very necessary for the evolution of this style of music, for this style of like technicality in this kind of a genre. I mean, you get like the overly complicated like prog metal stuff nowadays, and even a lot of that wouldn't have been quite possible without Primus. And I know there's like shit like Dream Theater and all that, but I think that a lot of like the groove heavy stuff, without Primus, I don't think you would get stuff like Tool. I don't think the Rage Against the Machine would pop off nearly as hard. You know, I think a lot of these songs and a lot of these classic records are very dependent on something like this. This is, to me, a huge keystone record for what it is. So if you have not listened to this album, go ahead and give it a listen. I mean, this is the first Primus record. There's tons of stuff riding on this album. There's all kinds of crazy influences going in this thing, from like classic rock to prog rock to jazz and funk and like hip hop beats and stuff. There's just so much brewing in this record, and it really just pops off, man. This is an amazing album. Have you listened to this record? What do you think of it? Leave your opinion in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. What should I review next? Over the weekend, I hope I can get up another Weekends Project video. It depends. I've got some more stuff coming in the mail for that Telecaster build, so we'll see if it comes in the mail in time to get that stuff done. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you all on the flip side.